to our Ambassador Conversation series. Today, our conversation is with His Excellency Carlos Raúl Vásquez Corrales. He's the ambassador for the Republic of Peru to the Republic of Singapore. Now, nestled in South America, Peru is a land of diverse landscapes, from the Andes Mountains to the coastal deserts and the Amazon forest. Now, it's steeped in history. It carries a legacy of the Inca Empire, which mingles with contemporary influences to shape its vibrant culture. Now, its economy thrives on mineral exports, agriculture, and a thriving tourism sector that draws visitors to landmarks like Machu Picchu. Now, Peruvian cuisine is celebrated globally. Now, it weaves together diverse flavors and ingredients. Now, on that note, Carlos, welcome to the show.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for this very nice presentation. Yes, effectively, you have made a very good depiction of my country. It's a very diverse country from a natural point of view and from a cultural point of view. I always say, my friends, that in my opinion, the Philippines is the most Latin American country in Southeast Asia because of the influence of the Spaniards. In the case of Latin America, the most Asian country, in my opinion, is Peru. Why? Because since the middle of the 19th century, we received a very large wave of migrants from China. This was a phenomenon that was replicated in some other Latin American countries. But in Peru, it was a very deep process of mingling with the local population. And it was massive because we received approximately 100,000 Chinese since 1850 and 1880, because black slavery was abolished in my country, and there was a shortage of labor force in the countryside. And the owners of these large plantations that were mainly sugarcane and cotton plantations decided to send a mission trade mission to China that was already controlled by the British Empire, mainly Hong Kong and Guangdong province, and they brought with them, in a period of 30 years, approximately 100,000 Chinese, very, very young male workers, as indentured workers, to work in my country for a period of between 7 and 10 years. 90% of them decided to stay because at that time, imagine, in China there were wars and famine, and most of them mixed with the local population. So as a result of that process, approximately 10% of the current Peruvian population are the descendants of those Chinese. And we were able to enrich our already very nice cuisine at the time with the influence of the Chinese ingredients and cooking techniques. So some of the most emblematic Peruvian dishes have that Chinese influence. So, and not only Chinese, but after that, there was a certain Japanese influence too. After Brazil, the second Japanese community in Latin America is located in Peru. So we have a very large Asian influence that is very clearly positioned in Peruvian society. So it is very interesting because it's not only the fact that we have a very long history, a very long, diverse peoples that were developing my country before the arrival of the Spaniards, but after that process, during our independence period, we received migrants from China, from Japan, even some migrants from Europe, some Italians, but the Italian was much more popular and much more successful in Argentina than in Peru. For that reason, I think that there is this special connection that is, in my opinion, very unique between Peru and Asia. It's a very long connection, historically speaking. And now we have that advantage as a country to be particularly connected to this area of the world in spite of distance. We have just adopted a free trade agreement between the Pacific Alliance countries, that perhaps you know about this integration mechanism that gathers Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. We have just signed a free trade agreement with Singapore as a block of countries. No, when this free trade agreement gets into force, Singapore is going to become the first associated state of the Pacific Alliance. And one of the main objectives of the Pacific Alliance was precisely to project collectively the interest of these four countries into the Asia-Pacific basin.
And just to give context to our audience, the Pacific Alliance of these four countries has a GDP of 2 trillion US dollars.
Yes.
So it's massive.
It is considered the 8th largest GDP in the world, as a block of countries. No, of course, Mexico has a very large chunk of all this GDP. But in the case of Peru, we have an economy of a little bit more than 240 billion US dollars. No, but we are very rich in terms of, as you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, in terms of minerals. But minerals is a tantamount of I don't know, between 50 and 60% of our exports are minerals. No, and historically speaking, that has been the case in Peru. We are trying to diversify a little bit in the last few years. No, our dependence on raw materials and particularly on minerals. Another very important sector that has been booming in the last few years is the agricultural sector. In the beginning of this century, in the year 2000-2001, there was a law that was approved that creates a sort of a very favorable ecosystem, economic ecosystem for the production of agricultural products, goods. And at that time, we exported, I don't know, less than $1 billion US in terms of agricultural food, in terms of agricultural products. Now we are exporting more than 20 billion. So in a period of 20 years. So it has been a sector of the Peruvian economy that has experienced a very important growth in the last few years. So in real terms, our main economic sectors, the most important ones in terms of our GDP, are the mining sector, in which we have a lot of foreign investments, and of course, the most important companies that are listed in our stock exchange are mainly in the mining sector. No, the mining sector, and because we have a lot of companies from Australia, from South Africa, from UK, from United States, that are from some of the neighboring countries, Chile to be more precise, because Chile and Peru are the most important producers of copper in the world. Chile is the first one, Peru is the second one. But in the last few years, we have received important, significant investments from Asia, particularly China.
And China is your largest trading partner, isn't it? So all those historical connections have, I'm sure, also helped to attract investments into Peru.
Yes, only to tell you something, I was examining some statistics. In the year 2000, approximately 25% of our exports were with the Asian region in general, no, excluding North America. So only, not the Asia-Pacific region in general, but only the Asian region. So China, Japan, Korea, India, and the countries here in Southeast Asia. In 2010, that percentage increased from 24 to 35 approximately. Before the pandemic in 2019, that percentage has skyrocketed to the level of 45%. And now, last year, our exports to this area of the world, so the Asian region, so then the ASEAN countries, China, Japan, India, that now is our 6th trade partner, and 2 years ago, India was our 5th trade partner because of the exports of gold to the Indian market.
Okay.
And Australia, New Zealand. All this group of countries represent 48% of our exports. So, and the percentage of the North American market, in absolute terms, is still very important, but in relative terms, well, has been reduced from 24-25% to 17-16%. So in spite of distance, in spite of the fact that we are separated from the vast and huge Pacific Ocean, our exports to this area of the world have increased significantly in the last 20 years. So this is a trend that you can verify in the statistics year after year. Mm-hmm.
I want to interrupt you a little bit here, because when you look at your trade balance, yes, the China takes a lot. India is I think Japan and Korea.
Yes, important trade balance.
The countries in ASEAN, this is not significant yet. Why is that, and where do you see the opportunity?
No. Only to tell you an example, we have an entity, an agency that is in charge of the promotion of exports and tourism in my country. Its name is Peru, like Singapore Enterprise or something like that. No? To promote trade and for investments of Peruvian companies abroad and tourism. And for them, taking into account the evidence showed by the statistics, unfortunately, the ASEAN market was not a priority market, because a very large chunk of all this export to this area of the world is China. Out of this 48% of our exports, 33 go to China. So China is by far our first trade partner. That's the case of a lot of South American countries now. And unfortunately, in spite of the fact that we have with Singapore a free trade agreement that we signed, a bilateral free trade agreement that we signed with Singapore in 2008 and got into force in 2009, in spite of the fact that we have a free trade agreement with Thailand that is reduced only to goods, not services yet, and we are trying to negotiate a free trade agreement with Indonesia. It's a little bit complicated. And now we are members of CPTPP, and because of that, we have now we have access to three very important markets here in Southeast Asia: Malaysia, Brunei, and Vietnam. But in spite of all those very important advancements and progress in terms of our access to these markets, the Peruvian businessmen are still much more interested in the conventional markets that they know much better than this one, that are United States, Europe, and here in Asia, mainly China, Korea, and Japan, and increasingly India.
Interesting.
India, yes. Some years ago, India was our 16th or 17th trade partner. Why? Because the Peruvian gold that got into India at that time passed by a sort of intermediate country that was Switzerland. Mm-hmm. Now the Indian importers of gold are in touch directly with Peruvian exporters. So the whole, well, not the whole, but a very important production of gold now is directly exported from Peru to India. So all the gold that was exported to Switzerland and then re-exported from Switzerland to India was registered in our statistics as exports from Peru to Switzerland.
Right.
Not to India. No, but now they are registered as exports from Peru to India directly. And only because of that product, gold, that, as you know, is extremely expensive, India has become some years ago, our 5th trade partner, and last year, our 6th trade partner. So more than $2 billion to the Indian market. That, in terms of the size of our economy, is a very important trade partner. So, and that reveals too the way in which the Indian economy is growing very fast in the last few years. So it's going to become, at least for Peru, a very important trade partner.
So, Carlos, which brings me back to the issue which you mentioned.
Yes.
Peruvian businesses are more interested in these big traditional markets.
Yes.
To a lesser extent to ASEAN.
Yes.
Now, you have been in this region for a long time. You've
Yes.
been in Singapore for 5 years. Previously, in a previous posting, you were also based in Malaysia for many years. Where do you see the opportunities for ASEAN companies to invest in Peru?
In two specific sectors, in my opinion. Agriculture, for example, there is a Singaporean company. Well, it's not a Singaporean company. It's a company that is domiciled here in Singapore. So their headquarters are here in Singapore, but its capital is from France, Belgium, and they have some local partners here in Singapore. But they have bought a cocoa plantation in the Amazon jungle, a huge cocoa plantation in the Amazon jungle, 2,000 hectares. And in accordance with the opinion of the experts of this company, the cocoa that is grown in this plantation is of a very high quality. I didn't know that in the Amazon jungle you can find the highest variety of cocoa in the world. So that reveals, in accordance with the specialists in this kind of issues, that the Amazon jungle is probably the land of origin of cocoa. Okay. Of course, we didn't create chocolate. Chocolate is a creation of the Mexicans.
Yes.
No, but the cocoa grain, the raw material, apparently is from the Amazon jungle. So, and there was a migration of these seeds some way from the Amazon jungle to Central America up to Mexico. And in Mexico, the traditional Aztec culture, they created the chocolate. Even chocolate is an Aztec word, chocolatl.
So agriculture definitely an area.
Agriculture definitely is a very important sector in which ASEAN companies could have a very interesting opportunities. The other one, in my opinion, is infrastructure. We have a very large deficit in terms of infrastructure. Railways, roads, airports, ports. Now, the Chinese are building a very large port on the Peruvian coast. This was a little bit controversial project, but now the project is in full progress. Well, as you know, next year Peru is going to be the host country of APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. And the idea of the Chinese, well, COSCO company that is in charge of the development of this project, with some local partners, Peruvian local partners, of course, they have the intention of opening or even initiating the operations of this port during the presence of Mr. Xi Jinping in Peru as the representative of the Chinese economy in the APEC summit. That would be November next year. So this is a very important development in my country. We have an important port, the traditional one, the Port of El Callao, that is very close to Lima, the capital of my country. This port is located 50 kilometers north of the Port of El Callao, but in its first phase is supposed to handle approximately 1 million containers per year. Okay. But the most important thing is that the waters where this port is located are very deep. So it's going to be able to receive very large containers vessels. No? And the idea of the Chinese, if it's possible, is to develop some kind of direct maritime routes between this port on the Pacific coast of South America and China. So what we don't have is enough infrastructure to sustain and to support the possibility of establishing new value chains or new supply chains between the South American countries, particularly Peru and Southeast Asia. That is one of our most important obstacles, for the time being. So all our exports usually use other routes, indirect routes, to arrive up.
And that all adds to cost and therefore cost competitiveness of your
That's
product.
that's the problem mainly. So some residual amounts of our exports, for example, to China, Japan, and Korea, end up in Southeast Asia. So that's a problem. We have promoted these markets very actively and sometimes very aggressively with our Peruvian business federations. So we receive a trade mission of 8 Peruvian companies that are involved in the agricultural sector here in Singapore some months ago. It was a very successful trade mission. They were in touch with companies that are registered in Singapore Business Federation. They have a meeting with Enterprise Singapore. And Enterprise Singapore is interested in sending next year a trade mission to Peru, and some other Latin American countries, but to explore mainly 2 markets: agricultural products. You know that in the case of Singapore, is highly dependent on food imports.
Yeah, and food security is a big issue, not only for Singapore, but for a lot of countries in the region.
So Latin America, and particularly South America, is a very important source of high-quality food. I think is one of the links that could be reinforced in the next few years between Latin America, and particularly Peru, and Southeast Asian nations, and other markets that apparently is going to be explored by these Singaporean markets that are going to visit my country is seafood. Seafood, because if you see statistics of the last few years, the seafood export of Peruvian products to Singapore has increased a little bit, but we are exporting char fin to the Singaporean market. I don't know if it's for the Singaporean market or from here. It's re-exported to China and some other Asian destinations. But we are exporting in the last few years shrimps, frozen shrimps, char fin, and there is a growing interest here in Singapore and in some other Southeast Asian markets in seafood, not only in agricultural products coming from Peru. And for Singaporean companies interested in that market, I think, as I told you, agriculture, and infrastructure are fields or sectors in which there is a lot of new opportunities in Peru. A lot. You cannot imagine, because we have a very large deficit. If you review the index of competitiveness, this report of competitiveness that is developed every year by the World Economic Forum, in terms of infrastructure, Peru occupies not a very important position. So we have a very high deficit in terms of, we need a lot of investments in infrastructure. So to be more competitive, to reduce costs, to be more productive, and to have more integrated relations in terms of logistics and connectivity with our markets, mainly in the Asian region. So we need a lot of investments.
Carlos, on that note, thank you very much for your insights. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
I think me and the audience, we've learned a lot. Before we leave, however, any final short bursts that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Well, Peru is a country that has been growing before the pandemic in a significant way. Peru was considered a sort of miracle after the economic crisis that we had to face in the 1980s. and the political crisis, but we had to face one of the bloodiest terrorist movements in the world, Chinese Path, and they were defeated, fortunately, in the beginning of the 90s. So in the 90s, and mainly in the years 2000s and until 2019, Peru grew at the rate of between 5 and 6% every year. So it was a boom in terms of our economic growth. Well, the effects of the pandemic have affected a lot of sectors, mainly the tourism sector, that is other very important sector that was booming before the pandemic. Peru has a very great potential in terms of tourism because of the very important touristic attractions that we have in Peru, mainly the citadel of Machu Picchu that you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation. And it's a country that, in spite of, against all odds, and in spite of all the effects that the pandemic had in Latin America, particularly in Peru, grew last year at a rate of approximately 2.5%. So we are in the process of recovery after the effects of the pandemic. And well, our political stability has not been the best one in the world in the last few years. But in spite of that, no, the Peru has a very solid macroeconomic foundations. We have one of the lowest inflation rates in Latin America. No, the Peruvian currency has reinforced regarding the US dollar in the last few months. So unlike the other Latin American countries that are a little bit unstable in terms of macroeconomic foundations, inflation, external debt, our external debt ratio is one of the lowest in Latin America too. So we have a very stable economic foundations in spite of the fact that our political sphere is not very stable. But I think that the future is very promising. And as I told you, there are some economic sectors that are really very could be very interesting for potential Singaporean or Southeast Asian investors: agricultural sector, infrastructure sector, well, seafood, why not, and tourism. I think these four sectors are the most promising ones. I am not talking about mining, because when I talk about mining, I have to talk about very huge companies that are able to invest in that sector that is a little bit complicated. So in the mining sector, we have investors mainly from the countries that have accumulated a lot of experience in this field: Australia, Canada, South Africa, well, and recently China, UK. A little bit of investment from UK, a little bit of investment from America. Yes, well, from the United States, because we are Americans too, but from South America. And well, that's my last message to you.
Carlos, thank you very much for taking your time to be on this show. Okay,
it has been a pleasure. It has been a pleasure, really a pleasure. And I wish all kind of success to your new platform. I think it's going to be very useful for to get to know each other much better.
Thank you, Carlos. We've been speaking to His Excellency Carlos Raúl Vásquez Corrales, the Ambassador of the Republic of Peru to Singapore. I'm Brian Fernandez, and you've been watching and listening to BizTech's Ambassador Conversation Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.
Thank you.